Good evening, everybody. Welcome for another episode of Bay State After Hours, and we have a good one for you this for tonight. We are going to be talking about feeding your horse during the winter months. How's it going, everybody? So I know this is a little bit later than we normally do it, but now that our hours have changed, we're open till 7. I have to do this a little bit later. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Kevin. I am one of the managers of Bay State Pet and Garden Supply in Taunton, Massachusetts. I've been in the industry for about 15 years, and one of the biggest things that I've noticed is that a lot of people get misinformation online. So I wanted to create a way where people can actually get accurate information and have a place where they can go and feel free to ask their questions. So that's why I developed this show. So before we begin, I just like to thank Pool and Grain for sponsoring this. So Pool and Grain has been a leader in the animal industry since 1932. Their mission is to be a leader in the feed and agricultural field by producing quality feed with cutting-edge customer service. The feeds are formulated to meet the unique demands of the Northeast and are packed with cutting-edge technology and research in every bite. Hashtag Pool Empowered. So with us today to answer some of the biggest questions we have about feeding your horse is Dr. Tania Cubitt. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
It's always great having you. So I'm just going to let you go right into it. So we are giving away a couple bags of feed tonight. So I'm going to put that up on the bottom. All you have to do is comment Poolin from wherever you're watching, YouTube, Facebook, and actually now I have it on Twitter as well. So wherever you're watching us from, put it in the comments. I'll be able to see it, and we're going to give away not one, but 2 free bags of grain. Plus, we're giving away 2 other free bags to the ones who texted early. So Dr. Tania, I'm going to let you take it over.
Awesome. If you want to share my screen, we can go ahead and get started.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. I'm going to face away, so you might want to turn me off now. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. And I'm excited I'm not really excited. I hate the winter, but it's inevitable. The winter is coming. For a lot of you in the New England area, you're already feeling it. And we often ask ourselves, like, is there something that I need to change over the winter months, or can I just continue doing what I'm doing during every other uh, day of the year? So tonight we'll just talk briefly about digestive function, because if we fully understand how the horse's gut works and how it digests its food, then we can capitalize on some of those digestive processes in order to keep him warm, or we understand exactly what he needs in the wintertime. We'll talk about some energy requirements and fiber requirements and water requirements and what they look like in the wintertime. And then probably one of the most common questions I get about feeding over the winter is, how do I get my horse to maintain weight or even gain weight through these colder months, which can be a bit of an uphill battle, but we've still got a wee bit of time to get that weight on them before we get into the depths of winter. So real quick, for a lot of you, this is going to be overview, but I think it's important that we understand that horses are meant to be grazing animals. They live in herds, they graze continually. Nothing about the word meal is normal for a horse, right? They don't eat meals. They graze continually, probably about 17 hours out of the day. They move around. They eat from the ground. And they have a long neck so that they can do that. That's the only reason a horse has a long neck, is so that he can stand up and reach the ground and eat, so that if a predator came along, he could run away from it, right? And when he does that, it also increases natural drainage of the respiratory tract, increases chewing time, decreases muscular tension in the neck and back, and it maintains proper teeth alignment. Unfortunately, though, a lot of us just don't have access to large amounts of pasture for our horses to graze on, and they don't live in herds, and we exercise them, and we do have to meal feed them because they fit into our schedule. And They have to do that because we have to have a job to pay for all of this. So we have more of the right hand side where we have that horse standing in a box stall, and that's a beautiful box stall. It's well bedded. Maybe he's got some heat lamps in there so he's nice and warm, or he wears a blanket. But he probably eats a higher cereal grain based diet and consumes that really quickly. That can increase the acidity of the GI tract. Some horses don't like being stuck in stalls. Others really don't care whether they're by themselves or with others. And we know that exercise level is all over the board. And what you can see there is that feed bucket, that green bucket is his feed bucket, and it's hanging at chest height, which really changes the anatomical position, feeding position of that horse and decreases the saliva that's produced. Um, Now, when you think about horses chewing, if they have access to grass, they're going to continually chew all day long. They'll chew about 60,000 times. But when we put a horse in a stall and we give him hay and grain, we cut in half the amount of chews he does. And that significantly decreases the amount of saliva, number one, that's being produced, which helps to lubricate the throat so they don't choke, but it also buffers the stomach acid. You can see these graphs here are actually the movement of that bottom jaw when they're chewing. So you can see that shorter line for this top picture, we're looking from underneath the horse's muzzle up at his muzzle. And you can see the shorter line is when he's chewing on pellets or any kind of chopped or shorter fiber length. That's his bottom jaw going around in that circular motion. It's a really choppy motion. But when he's eating long stem hay, he has a much wider jaw sweep, much more even dental wear because he's now sweeping across all surfaces and wearing them more evenly. Now, as you know, if you did have access, if your horses did have access to pasture, if you've had some frost that's really gone dormant now, and we're going into the period where the horses aren't getting any moisture out of the grass, they're 100% reliant on us for their fiber requirements, eating dried hay. And so we go through this transition in the gut of less moisture available because it's cooler, we're not drinking, the horse isn't drinking as much, they're not getting moisture out of the pasture. So we really worry about impaction colic, and especially if they're also not getting as much saliva from that continual chewing. Saliva is also helping to hydrate them. So trying to encourage them to be continually chewing is ideal. I mentioned that saliva is a buffer. It lubricates the throat so that they don't choke, but it is also a buffer to the stomach acid. If we take 2 pounds of feed, pellets, textured feed, and we put it in a tub on the ground, we can document that they will chew that, have about 1,000 jaw sweeps. So that bottom jaw will sweep across the top jaw about 1,000 times. If we take 2 pounds of hay and put it on the ground, so in a tub on the ground, they will chew that about 2,000 times. But if we take that same feed and put it at chest height, they'll only chew that about 350 to 500 times. So significantly decreasing the amount of chews, therefore the amount of saliva, the amount of dental wear, etc. The stomach is really small. I've got it highlighted here in pink in relation to the rest of the digestive system because, again, the horse was never meant to eat meals. If I was to show you the digestive system of a lion or tiger, his stomach is huge because he doesn't know when his next meal is coming, and they're going to have to gorge on that, fill their stomach, and then slowly digest it. But the horse is designed to be continually grazing. And I know that we can't do that if we don't have access to pasture, but when we're making feeding decisions, we need to keep that in the back of our mind. Horse is meant to be a grazing animal. He's meant to be chewing on something continually. His digestive system is anatomically built to do that. If I cut a window in the stomach and let you look inside, there are two distinct regions. There's dark pink tissue at the bottom, which is what we call the glandular mucosa, or I just call it the protected region, because there's a mucus coating protecting that tissue from the acid that is secreted continually. Now, if you've ever unluckily had a horse with gastric ulcers, a lot of them are right along this line that delineates between the two sections called the Margo plicatus. And right up on this light pink tissue, which is the squamous mucosa or the unprotected region, because there's no mucus coating up there. Right? The acid is supposed to stay down in the bottom, and it's supposed to stay diluted by food and saliva and digestive enzymes and that are coming from the saliva will help to to dilute and buffer that. But if the horse doesn't eat continually or have something in his stomach, then that acid will build up and splash up onto that non-protected region. Some of the more severe gastric ulcers will be here where the stomach actually joins onto the small intestine. There's a sphincter here called the pyloric sphincter, and it's the connection between the two regions. Sometimes we'll get ulcers there because we don't have as much mucus there, but also we know that bute, for example, will wear away at that mucus coating, so there can be some ulcers there as well. Next, we move to the small intestine, which is like a big long garden hose. We know that there are enzymes here that break down the food that continue to allow it to be digested. We're going to be digesting primarily sugars and starches, some protein and fat, minerals, some vitamins. We're not digesting any fiber here. We've gone away from the acid, which was in the stomach, which was breaking down the food. Now we've got enzymes breaking down the food, a specific enzyme, amylase, which is responsible for breaking down starch, but we know horses aren't meant to eat a lot of starch in a single meal. So we don't like to feed any more than, say, 3 to 5 pounds of grain in a single meal because, number one, the stomach is small, and number two, if it's a high starch type meal, they're just not going to be able to digest it, and it will flow through to the hindgut of the horse and cause all kinds of problems. So from here on back, we call this the hindgut of the horse. We start with the cecum, going to the large colon and the small colon. And when we're talking about feeding horses in the wintertime, the hindgut is really the powerhouse. This is the most important part of the digestive system all year round, but in the wintertime, there are some other things that occur here that make it really, really important. So we have all kinds of microbes and bacteria and fungi and viruses and all different organisms that live in the hindgut. We call them collectively the microbiome. And there are microbiomes everywhere. It's just a community of organisms working together. There's some on your skin, they're in the respiratory system, but we're here talking about the equine gut microbiome. And what they do is they're primarily responsible for breaking down and digesting fiber. Those microbes then will create different nutrients that the horse can absorb and utilize, or that may actually heal intestinal tissue. So there is a particular volatile fatty acid called butyrate, which is made by some of those bacteria. After they're breaking down the fiber, they'll create butyrate, and butyrate feeds those intestinal cells and keeps them healthy. But we do know so the cecum is a blind sac. It's the beginning of the hindgut. And when I say blind sac, the entry and exit point are at the exact same place. So it's easy for gas to build up here, for blockages to occur. And now we see the rate of passage. So in the stomach, it can be as quick as 30 minutes for food to pass through the stomach. Then we go 3 to 4 hours for the small intestine. But by the time we get to the hindgut, it can be 7 hours to get through the cecum. And then we move to the large colon, can be up 35 to 65 hours to get through the large colon. Now, another byproduct of those bacteria that live in the hindgut, of them breaking down that fiber, is that they create heat. So one of the simplest things you can do to keep your horses warm in the wintertime is make sure you're feeding them enough fiber, because those bacteria are going to break it down and create heat. And we don't have to feed the most digestible fiber. We maybe want to add in some stemmy or first cut fiber. The harder those bacteria have to work, the more heat they will create metabolically. The small colon, now really all we're doing is absorbing more moisture and any of that non-digestible fiber that's left over, forming fecal balls that will be stored here until they're excreted. So the most important thing any time of the year is to start with forage. The absolute bare minimum is 1% of a horse's body weight. So let's say he's 1,000 pounds, that would be 10 pounds of dry fiber per day. We don't ever feed that little because he will lose weight, he'll be unhealthy, but it'll keep his gut moving. If you have a fat horse, utilize the winter to help you get some weight off him. Feed him about 1.2% of his fat body condition, which will work out to be about 1.5% of his ideal body weight. But more typically, horses that are in decent body condition, not losing, not gaining weight, anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5% of their body weight. So 15 to 25 pounds of dry hay per day is what they're going to require to help maintain their body weight, maintain body heat, maintain the calories. Now, they will probably need extra vitamins and minerals on top of that, but whether it's a balancer pellet or whether it's a higher calorie feed will depend on their body weight, but it'll also depend on the environmental conditions. We know that if we don't feed enough forage, this is something I see a lot in the Northeast, especially as we start to come out of the winter time, is I see a lot of wood chewing. Oh, my horses have started chewing the fences or the trees. And a lot of times I believe this is due to our horse owners are very cognizant of feeding good hay during the wintertime because they know the ground is covered in snow, they're not getting any grass. But often we will feed a really lush, nutritious, highly digestible, maybe second cut hay, and the horse is craving some of that non digestible fiber. So for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons I recommend adding multiple different fiber sources is to kind of supply those bacteria in the hindgut with a variety of different fiber types, and it can really stop those horses chewing. So don't be afraid to use some local, probably stemmier hay in conjunction with your better nutritional value hay. I love this research because I think it tells us that horses are smart and sometimes we don't always listen. Um, this study was done on 36 horses, 3-year-old horses, and they were fed one of two diets, either a high forage diet or a low forage diet. Um, the gray bars represent the horses that ate the high forage diet, and the white bars represent the horses that ate the low forage diet. And if we go all the way to the end of this chart and kind of read it backwards, the last two bars, which are not statistically different, represent the total amount of time the horses spent eating that the researchers observed them eating. And you can see that there's no difference. It doesn't matter what diet they got, they spent the total amount of time eating the same. But if we come back to the beginning of the chart and look at eating the ration total, now this represents the total amount of time they spent eating what we gave them. Not just eating, but eating what we gave them. And the horses that had the high fiber diet spent considerably more time eating it. Makes sense, right? It takes a lot longer for them to chew that long stem hay versus the horses that had a lot of grain and only a little bit of hay. They spent considerably less time eating what we provided them. So, what were the horses doing in the rest of the time so that it made it look like they were eating for the same total amount of time? Well, the horses that were on the low forage diet spent more time, considerably more time, almost double the amount of time as the other horses, eating bedding and feces. So, horses will get fiber, they'll get what they need, but it's not always from the most ideal sources. We don't want our horses eating bedding. We certainly don't want them eating manure. Increase our risk for parasites and impaction colic. So let's talk a little bit more about winter now. That's what we're all here to talk about. We've kind of done an overview of the digestive things and the things that are really critical and a little bit of an understanding of how the digestive system works. So how can we capitalize on that? In the winter months, horses may decrease their feed intake in cold and windy weather and seek shelter. Now, this is horses that are out in a field that don't have the luxury of coming into the stall. When the snow accumulation is greater than 7 inches, it covers the grass and it really decreases that pasture intake. So, if we were looking at a group of wild horses, decreases grazing time by about 24% and decreases intake considerably as well. Pouring through deep snow to get to grass greatly increases the energy requirement. So they're just burning calories trying to even get the calories. In cold and windy conditions, horses will lose a lot more body heat and burn more calories just to try and stay warm. There is a term that we use in winter called the lower critical temperature. And it is the temperature below which metabolic heat production must be increased to maintain body temperature. So, you know, we maintain our own body temperature at 98, 99 degrees. And we do that by metabolic heat production, and the horses will do the same. But if the external temperature gets too low, then it's going to take them more metabolic heat to maintain, so more calories to maintain their regular body temperature. And in mature horses, that lower critical temperature ranges anywhere from 18 degrees Fahrenheit outside to 41 degrees Fahrenheit. And really the difference becomes whether the horse has a thin coat or a thick coat. So our thoroughbreds or Arabians that have that really slick, thin coat versus our ponies or draft breeds that have a really thick coat. They will have a much lower critical temperature. Young horses, we've got a different range here. We're looking at 12 degrees Fahrenheit to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, so a narrower window. For each degree in coldness below that critical temperature, there's an increase in the energy requirement of the horse. So let's say we've got a thoroughbred with a really thin coat. Every degree below 41 degrees external Fahrenheit, um, they're going to need more calories. You're going to have to feed them more to maintain, just to maintain them. So if it's 41 degrees out, so we're going to use that thin coated horse. It's 41 degrees out. We just need to feed him his regular diet that maintains him and no additional, he's fine. Let's say it's 31 degrees out. So now we're 10 degrees below that lower critical temperature for our horse. He requires an extra 2 megacals of energy per day. And let's assume we're feeding him a really nice quality hay. So an alfalfa grass mix maybe that has about 1 megacal per pound. I'll just to put this in perspective, most of our local hays are going to run about 0.8 megacals per pound. So you would have to increase a little bit more. So let's say we're feeding a nice, good quality hay. We would have to feed an additional 2 pounds a day if it's 1 megacal per pound is the energy concentration of that hay. If it's 20 degrees below that lower critical temperature. So we're looking at 21 degrees Fahrenheit. Then we're going to have to feed an additional 4 pounds of that good quality hay a day. If we're at 1 degree, so we're 30 degrees below, or 10 degrees, I should say, 11 degrees. Now we're looking at an extra 6 pounds. If we're at 1 degree Fahrenheit, so it's really cold, we're having to feed an extra 8 pounds of that really good hay on top of what we were already feeding. Now we get to a point where if it gets much colder, we just can't add any additional. But there are other environmental conditions that can affect how much extra calories the horse is going to need. So let's say it's 32 degrees out. So it's not quite snowing yet. It's windy. It's 32 and it's windy. The wind alone, because remember, how does a horse lose body heat in the summertime? Evaporative cooling, breeze. They're going to evaporate that hot their heat. Well, in the wintertime, it's also going to suck away heat when it's windy. When it's windy, 10 to 15 miles an hour wind, and they don't have any shelter and they're not inside, that's going to increase their calorie requirements by about 4 to 8 megacals per day. So that good quality hay, we're looking at feeding an additional 4 to 8 pounds of hay on top of the at least 15 pounds of hay we were already doing. 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's raining. At this point, it's like freezing rain. It's awful. And we're looking at about 6 pounds of hay per day additional. 32 degrees and rainy and windy. Now we're getting into the realm of I can't physically feed this horse enough hay, extra hay to maintain them. So it would be about 10 to 15 pounds of extra hay. So let's say we were already feeding 15 to 20 pounds of hay. That was maintaining him. That's my 1.5 to 2% of body weight. And now I'm having to feed another 10 to 15 pounds of hay on top of that. Now we're looking at 30 to 40 pounds of hay per day. And some horses, it's just not going to be enough. So we now need to look at getting additional calories from a more concentrated energy source, adding additional calories from grain because we just can't get that amount of extra calories from hay. Now, I'm always going to increase hay first because remember, when they're breaking down the hay, they're just those microbes are producing heat. But as far as the extra calories required for metabolic heat production, we may just max out and need to feed them extra grain. So then I get asked a lot about, okay, well, what if I put a coat on them? What if we use blankets? Here's what we have to understand about the horse's hair coat and what it's meant to do. So there is that kind of graphic on the right hand side that's moving there. So one is the skin layer, two is a muscle. It's a muscle that's underneath the skin that goes down to the hair, and it's called the erector pili muscle, and it contracts and releases and makes the hair go stand on end. And in us, it'd be like goosebumps where your hair stands on end. We don't have a lot of hair on us on our body surface. But in the horse or furry animals where they have a lot of hair, those erector pili muscles allow the hair to stand up on end. And now we get a lot, and it's straight up and down. And we get a lot more air trapped between the tip of the hair and the skin layer. And air is a really good insulator. In the summertime, the hair lays down flat, doesn't pop up, right? Because we don't want that air insulating. We want to dissipate that heat. But in the wintertime, the hair stands up straight and it makes this air pocket between the tip of the hair and the skin. Now, if a horse has a nice fur, a long hair coat, and it's not wet or muddy, and we put a blanket on top of them, then it really flattens down that natural insulation. And the horse's natural insulation is a lot of times better than the blanket we can put on. Now, of course, if you're riding your horse and you have to clip them, or it's really hard to cool them down, so you keep their hair shorter, then putting a blanket on them makes it easier. Also, if they're wet or muddy, then that obviously stops those erector pili muscles from being able to make the hair stand on end, and that defeats that's why when it's raining, they're going to use a lot more calories. So as I said, the hair coat insulate the horse's body by trapping and warming the air. Muddy hair coat reduces the insulating value. As little as 0.1 inch of rain can cause cold stress by matting the hair and reducing that insulation value. Thicker the hair coat, the more heat they can retain. Another question I get is, okay, so I do blanket. So when do I need to, or when do I not need to? If no shelter is available during turnout periods and the temperatures or wind chill, and now this is for that horse with a thick coat already. So I've got a horse with a thick coat. Oh, when do I need to, when do we get to the point where I need to put a blanket on him? If we get that wind chill drop below 5 degrees Fahrenheit, then, and he's got no shelter available, we need to either bring him in, put a blanket on him, do something. Um, if the horse will become wet and can't get out of the freezing rain. In my graduate program, we had brood mares on the farm we were at, and it was very rare for those brood mares, and we didn't blanket them, but it was very rare for them to seek shelter. If it was freezing rain, they were always standing in the shelter. It could be snowing out, and they were all out in it as long as it was, nice out. But if it was windy and freezing rain, they're all standing in the shelter. The horse has had its winter coat clipped, obviously, because you're riding them, then you have to blanket them. If it's old and it doesn't have a good fat layer, then as they age, their thermoregulation is decreased as well. If your horse is not acclimated to the cold, you usually live in Florida, and for some strange reason you left Florida and went north for the wintertime, which would be terrible, and they're not acclimated to the cold, then definitely blanketing and then bringing them in. Or if your horse is thin, has a body condition score of 3 or less, definitely blanketing them then. It's really important that whether we're blanketing or we're using a shelter, that we are still mimicking that grazing behavior, right? Or as we're feeding the hay, we want to make sure that we're mimicking grazing behavior and extending mealtime. Um, I often get asked, oh my God, I just don't, I can't, I haven't been able to, it's a bad hay year. I haven't been able to buy enough hay. So I worked out for most people in the Northeast, there's about 5 months of not necessarily winter, but colder months in the fall, full on winter, and then mud season in the beginning of spring where we're not turning the horses out, even if we do have access to pasture. So it works out to be about 150 days. And if conservatively we were only doing 1.5% of body weight, so 15 pounds of hay per day for 150 days per horse over that 150 days, they need uh, about 1.1 tons. If the average grass bale, local grass bale, is about 40 pounds, that works out to be about 60 bales per horse. Most people have more than one horse, so we're really building up the amount of hay that we have to store. That's a lot of money sitting in my loft that is not making interest from me, that is just like sitting there as dead weight. So is there alternatives? Are there, if I can't get that much hay or I just financially can't afford that much hay at the beginning of the season, are there other ways that I can get that fiber into the horse? And yeah, there are. There's forage pellets. So Timothy or alfalfa pellets, they're not going to be any more digestible or calorie dense than a Timothy or alfalfa hay. But if you're using, say, a forage extender that is comprised of beet pulp and soy hulls and a variety of different fiber types, then that's going to increase the calorie content as well. You can see all of these have a pretty average non-structural carbohydrate content as well if you're concerned about that with your horse. But these are some forage alternatives. So if you balance a diet and you look here, so when you're looking at this graph, the idea is that all of these bars, which represent energy and protein and the different minerals, all touch that red line. That red line is 100% of that nutrients requirement is being met in the diet. So we can see exactly 100% of this diet is being met for energy. Not quite 80% of the iodine is being met, but we're going to feed an iodized salt. Um, I wasn't able to feed the 15 pounds of hay a day for this horse, so I subbed in 5 pounds of forage extender. The other reason why you might do this is that the hay that you had available to you just wasn't the highest nutritional value. And you'll note that I'm not saying quality because the only bad quality hay for me is got dirt, dust, mold, rats, weeds, string in it. Good quality is what's appropriate for your horse. So nutritional value and quality are different. But let's say the hay that we have just doesn't have the highest nutritional value, doesn't have the highest calorie content, and I want to boost the calorie content, then I might buy forage extender or alfalfa pellets and feed him 5 pounds of that. I'm still getting my 15 pounds of fiber per day. And I'm using a pound of balancer to balance the diet because this horse isn't doing anything. So that's a way that you can extend your hay or improve the nutritional value of your hay. Water has to be talked about when we're talking about winter feeding. I know that we forget about it a little bit because, when you're cold, you're not as thirsty because we don't feel like we're sweating. But if you're exercising your horse, they are still sweating. It's just evaporating so fast because the outside air is so dry, it's just evaporating so quickly. Um, this is where it really becomes important for you to know what's normal for your horse. So I can say for a maintenance horse, they'll have a range of about 5 to 15 gallons of water that they would drink in a day. That's a pretty wide range. And what if your horses normally drink 10 gallons of water a day, but then they start to drink 5? Well, it's still within the normal range, but it's not normal for your horse. So it's really ideal that you know what is normal for your horse in the summer, in the winter, and also in the summer and winter after you've ridden them. Um, Exercise, even in the wintertime, will increase the water intake 15 to 20 gallons. If they're pregnant, they've got about a maintenance requirement. But lactating mares, any of those mares that are having foals really early in the season, thoroughbreds, for example, where we really want them foaling early in January, then 13 to 20 gallons because they're pumping out milk, which is primarily water. So it's really important to note how much water they're drinking, making sure they're drinking plenty of water. Then also, okay, how do I tell if they're not drinking enough water? Well, we are either estimating based on what was normal for them and now they're not drinking that much, but how do I tell whether it was just a one-off or we've got some serious issues here? Okay, we can test for dehydration by number one, looking at the capillary refill time. So you lift up their top lip and you press your thumb on the gum of their upper above their teeth, and then you press and you take your finger away and see how long it takes for the color to come back. So where you press it, it'll become lighter in color. And when you take your finger away, the blood will come back to that area. And if it returns in 2 seconds or less, the horse is hydrated fine. If it takes 3 seconds or more for the color to come back, 100, 100, 100, or 1000, whatever you want to say, the horse is dehydrated. We can also do the skin pinch test on the neck, kind of right here where the slope of the shoulder and the neck. You pull a tent of skin up, and then you let it go. And if it snaps back in less than a second, the horse is hydrated. But if it takes more than 2 seconds, 2 to 4 seconds, we're moderately dehydrated, 4+ seconds, and we've got some dehydration going on, and you should probably call your veterinarian. Interesting. This is not something that I had thought a lot about, but as I was reading more about kind of feeding in the wintertime and some neat tips and tricks, uh, I recommend that horses have access to plain white salt year round. And a lot of people will do a salt block because it's convenient. They can put it outside. It's not getting tipped over. They can put it on the floor. But it's interestingly, it was brought up that in a colder climate, that salt block is going to get really cold and the horse isn't going to want to lick it, even if they need to. So in the wintertime, if you have the ability to offer loose salt or even put salt into your horse's feed, say 1 or 2 ounces of salt into your horse's feed, then maybe you should do that if that's practical. Um, Water should be between 45 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Some recent research that was actually published, and I think the Horse magazine did the Horse Online did a little article about it, that horses are more inclined to drink cooler water on that range versus the warmer water. They like it better. But anyway, anywhere between 45 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, research has shown that ponies increase their water intake by about 40% each day when water temperatures were above freezing during cold water. Um, Snow and ice is not, even though that they might dig through that and they might, in the worst case scenario, start eating that, it is not a substitute for water. The last question that I get very commonly is how do I put weight on my horse? And say we've got 1,000-pound horse and we want him to gain 40 to 45 pounds. That's about one body condition score. I can safely do that in about 60 days if it's not freezing cold outside. So if we're looking to do it, usually I say ideally if you're wanting to put extra weight on your horse in the wintertime, we're looking at October, November to be our 260 days. But if you're kind of moving closer to the Canadian border, then maybe we're looking at September, October, the further north you go to be your 60 days to get that weight on your horse. And we know that it takes an extra 10 megacals per pound above maintenance for them to gain a pound. If we were feeding oats, it's okay. So let's say we're feeding our 15 pounds of hay and our 6 pounds of grain, and that's just maintaining him at a 4. But we want him to be a 5 because we know he doesn't do well through the winter time, and I don't want him to come out of the winter time as a 3. So I'm going to try to put some weight on him, and I want to do it before it gets too cold. So we're feeding our hay and grain already, but that's maintaining him. He's not gaining any weight. If you chose oats as your calorie source, based on the calories per pound, we're looking at about 1.5 megacals per pound. you'd have to feed about 4.5 pounds of oats a day on top of your feed for 60 days to get that weight gain. Rice bran has the same calorie content as oats, but everybody who's seen rice bran versus oats, rice bran is pretty fluffy. So volume wise, 4.5 pounds of rice bran is going to be look like a lot more that you have to feed volume wise. Beet pulp, it's another super fiber. I love beet pulp, but if you're relying on beet pulp to put significant weight on your horse, you may as well wait till it's summer again because it's not going to put weight on your horse significantly and quickly. You're going to have to feed about 5 pounds of dry beet pulp a day. And we all know no one's going to feed dry beet pulp. You're going to wet it. And it's going to work out to be, depending on the amount of water you like to put with your beet pulp, about 10 to 15 pounds of wet beet pulp. And we start to max out on the amount the horse will eat at that point. Alfalfa hay, about 6 pounds a day on top of what you're already doing. My go-to, though, if I need to do it fast and safely, is fat oil. Oil has 4.6 megacalories per pound. So a little over 2 cups will give you that weight gain in 60 days. You want to spread that out over multiple meals. I like to feed at least 3, maybe 4 meals a day if I'm doing that much oil. And then I can do, say, half a cup of oil at each meal. You know that if your horse has starts to get diarrhea, that you've kind of gone too fast and you should back off the amount of oil. But you can safely feed about 2 measuring cups of oil a day to a horse to put significant weight on them. Every single oil, fancy oil, inexpensive oil, cheap oil, whatever, all has exactly the same calorie content. There are other reasons like omega-3s, palatability, that you might choose one oil over the other, but it has nothing to do with the calorie content because they are all exactly the same. So with that, that's been a bit of a whirlwind, but I do want to open it up. And if you have any questions, please ask them.
No, that was a lot of information. We did have one question. Somebody wanted to know if you have any other tips on trying to get more moisture into your horse in the winter.
Yeah, and that's a really great question. And I do. I know that a lot of people will like to do a mash. Um, a lot of people like to do it once a week. Oh, I add a bran mash on Friday nights and I put carrots and apples in it. One thing I would warn you about that. It's a rapid feeding change. If you're going to add a warm mash, do it every single day. And I do not like to feed wheat bran to horses because very high in phosphorus and it's pretty much non-digestible fiber. So I leave that for other animals. And if I'm going to do a warm mash, I'm either going to do rice bran or beet pulp. It's going to give me some more fiber content and I can wet it. I wet everything in the wintertime. It just helps get
Yeah.
more moisture into the gut. But I know I got people up in the, really cold areas. It's so awful to have to wet everything. I don't have hot water. Everything gets cold and frozen. And maybe you just if you don't have hot water at the barn, you just take a thermos so you can put a little bit of hot water in there. I know it can be a pain, but that's another trick to getting more moisture into their gut.
So somebody else said that this is the first time they were streaming on Twitter, and they said that the Twitter feed was actually cutting in and out. So they wanted to know if that I don't know. I'll have to try to adjust that, but they wanted to know if they can get a copy of your presentation.
Absolutely. I will send my slides to Kevin and I'll
Perfect.
let you handle that.
Perfect. Yeah. So Stacy, you can go ahead and just email me. I'll actually put my email up at the end of it. I'll put my email up.
And isn't this recorded on Facebook so that you can go back and rewatch
it? It is. Actually,
Yeah.
it is. So it's recorded on Facebook and it's recorded on YouTube. So you could always watch on another platform. I apologize. First time on Twitter. So I guess it didn't really work out too well. Other than that, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. No, looks like we're good. So as always, thank you, Tania. I really appreciate your support and giving us all this great information, because it can be scary going into those winter months.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So thank you very much. I really appreciate your support.
Thank you.
Awesome. And with that, I think the show is going to be over. So what I am going to do is I am going to let this promotion run up until, I know it's a little bit late now, so let's say up until Saturday. So if you're watching this video on any platform, comment Poolin in the comment section. You'll be entered to win a free bag of Poolin grain. And with that, if you guys have any other questions that you'd like me to forward over to Dr. Tania, let me know. And I think we're good. I know, Jeff. It has been a while. This is our busy season, so I'm not able to do our Facebook Lives as often as I want to. But trust me, come January, actually, I have one that we're talking about with Poolin Grain. But come January, I'll be doing them every week again. If you guys have any topics that you'd like me to talk about, let me know. And I think we're all set. Thank you, everyone. Oh, my email. That's right. Let's not forget that. My email. Email me anytime. And have a great night, everyone.